suppose you're the owner of a manufacturer of plastic lawn furniture. Your supplier of resin informs you that the cost of resin will increase by 5% due to the rising cost of petroleum. Can you simply raise the price of your furniture to offset the increase in resin prices to keep profit constant? What will happen to sales? Will they remain the same, or will they decrease so much that it would be better off to take a reduction in profits equal to the increase in resin costs? So the answers to these questions depends on the amount of the change in demand with a given change in price. So price elasticity of demand and supply determine the extent to which consumers and suppliers and the quantity of demand and supply respond to a change in price. This module will outline the important concept of price elasticity of demand. So learning objectives will cover what price elasticity of demand is, describe how elasticity of demand affects revenue, and explain what the cost, price, and income elasticity of demand is. So I recommend, check the course calendar to stay updated on what is going to be covered. Go through price elasticity of demand using the midpoint method video here, Khan Academy, elasticity of demand, Khan Academy, inelasticity, Khan Academy. These are great videos. Revenue and elasticity, Khan Academy. So Khan Academy is the best resource for videos on this. So cross elasticity of demand, I highly recommend watching Khan Academy videos and also doing the textbook questions. Textbook questions are very good practice for this. Price elasticity of demand. So an important aspect of the demand curve is how much the quantity changes when the price changes. Price elasticity of demand is the economic measure of how quantity changes when the price changes. So price elasticity of demand shows the responsiveness to quantity demanded of a good to change in price. So how it's calculated is here. This is one of the ways you can calculate it. You do percentage change in quantity demanded of good A divided by percentage change in price of good A. So that's one of the ways you can calculate it. So here you're given the price goes from $2 to $2.20, and the amount you buy falls from 10 to 8. So you would plug all that into the formula, and you get -2. So in this case, the price it's elastic demand. So that means that if the price goes up, there will be a high change in quantity demanded. So for every 1% increase in price, there will be a 2% decrease in quantity demanded. So this is one way you can calculate it. You can also calculate it with the midpoint method. That's a lot more reliable of a way to do it. So you would take, instead of putting this on the bottom here, you would have to put the midpoint of these two numbers here. So in this case, it would be 9. You put 9 down here because the midpoint of 8 and 10 is 9. And then here for this number, you would switch it to the midpoint of these two numbers. The midpoint of these two numbers is 210. So that's the midpoint, and you just put it down here. And that's a way more reliable measure than the percentage method. But yeah, so the midpoint method is a lot more reliable than the percentage method. So yeah, so here's the midpoint method. I highly recommend using the midpoint method. As you can see here, if you do the midpoint method, to find the midpoint, you can average them out. So you add them together, divide by 2. And here would be 9. This would be 9. And here, this would be 210. And then you would get -2.32. So you get different answers if you do the midpoint method versus the percentage method. But the midpoint method is more accurate. So the good is price elastic if the price elasticity of demand is greater than 1. So usually price elastic goods are not needs. So it's not a need if it's like a luxury good, like let's say a sports car, it's price elastic because people don't need it. So when the price goes up, they'll buy a lot less of it. The good is inelastic if the price elasticity of demand is less than 1. So demand is not very responsive to change in price. So it's usually a necessity that is like that. So for example, insulin, if the price of insulin went up, the quantity demanded wouldn't go down that much because people need it. Unit elasticity, it's very rare to see something unit elastic. That means that if the price goes up, the quantity demanded will go down by the same percentage. So if the price goes up by 1%, the quantity demanded would go down by 1%. That's exactly what would happen. Perfectly inelastic is if the price elasticity of demand is equal to 0. So a change in price will have no influence on quantity demanded. So it's impossible to find an exact example of this, but the closest example to this would probably be healthcare or groceries, because you need them to survive. So no matter the price it is, you're going to have to pay for it. But we don't have infinite money. So if it costs trillions of dollars, then we wouldn't be able to pay for it. But if it's somewhat, if we can still afford it with our income, it's basically perfectly inelastic. And then perfectly elastic is when any change in price will reduce demand to 0. So that's usually used in very competitive industries. So if an industry is very competitive and prices are basically the same, that would happen. So you could just switch to the competitor if the price goes up. It determines the price elasticity of demand. So price elasticity of demand is dependent on availability of close substitutes, narrowly defined goods, proportion of income spent on good and time. So availability of close substitutes, the more and closer substitutes available in the market for a good, the more elastic demand will be in response to a change in price. In this case, consumers will buy less of the good if its price increases and buy more of its substitute. This means the substitution effect of the good will be quite strong. Narrowly defined goods tend to have elastic demand. For example, the elasticity of demand for cars, a very broad category, will be inelastic because there are few substitutes for cars. However, for a narrowly defined type of car, e.g. Ford, the elasticity of demand will be elastic since it's much easier to find a substitute for cars. Proportion of income spent on the good, the smaller the proportion of income spent on the good, the more inelastic demand for the good will be. If the proportion of income spent on the good was small, a change in the price of the good will have a relatively small impact on demand, so the demand of the good will be inelastic. On the other hand, if the proportion of income spent on the good is large, change in the price of the good will have a relatively big impact on demand, so the demand of good will be elastic. So time period under consideration, demand tends to be more elastic in the long run rather than the short run. So for example, after the 2 world oil price shocks of the 1970s, the response to higher oil prices was modest in the immediate period after price increases, but as time passed, people found ways to consume less petroleum and other oil products. This included measures to get better mileage from their cars, higher spending on insulation, homes, and carpooling for commuters. The demand for oil became more elastic in the long run. So total revenue is the price charged times the quantity sold. And so when the price elasticity of demand is elastic, a rise in the price of the good decreases total revenue received from the sale of that good. So that is a rise in the price level will lead to more that proportionate fall in quantity demanded for the good and therefore fall in total revenue. So when the price elasticity of demand is inelastic, a rise in the price of the good increases total revenue received from the sale of that good. That is a rise in the price level will lead to a less than proportionate fall in quantity demanded for the good, and therefore the total revenue will rise. So yeah, I recommend do the textbook questions. That's the best way to succeed in this unit. So make sure to do the textbook questions and check your answers at the back of the textbook.